Good evening and welcome to KTN Weekend Prime this Sunday. I'm Yvone, Okwara, Matole. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
My name is Allan, Namu. Of course, tonight, Sunday the 29th, the Sunday after that Assembly of State Party, I always get it wrong. Yes. Assembly of State Parties meeting at The Hague, and what came of it, of course, Yvonne, that's the big topic tonight, isn't it?
Yes, we'll be discussing that. Was it a victory for the government in terms of their achievements when they went there? We will be discussing that, and of course, what next after this for the cases against Ruto and Sang, as well as the thing that perhaps we don't get to speak about quite a bit. It's the victims, the post-election violence victims. How do they get justice? Is that a subject that is forgotten when we discuss the politics surrounding the cases at the ICC? We will be discussing this and much more on Checkpoint, so please do send in your views. The hashtag is Checkpoint. Our guest tonight, Senator Kipchumba Murkomen. We also have Esther Waweru from the Kenya Human Rights Commission, both of whom, by the way, were present at The Hague for that edition of the ASP. We will also have from Kakamega with us, Advocate to the High Court, Elisha Ongoya, to give us more perspective on this. So it's definitely a discussion you don't want to miss.
Of course, there are more stories from Kenya and the East African region. Here now the highlights on KTN Weekend Prime.
Nilikuta gari ya matatu aina ya Nissan ikiwa kwa mto hapa na miguu yake ikiwa juu. Sasa watu walikuwa wanapiga mayowe.
Tragic end to a journey as 10 people die following a car accident in Kiambu County. Also coming up, politicians are back in the cabinet. What came of the technocrats' only idea?
Na deadline tumepewa na Mheshimiwa Rais ni tarehe 5 Januari.
Tumekubaliana kwamba ahadi yangu itakuwa inagayo vile mulisikia.
Plus, end in sight for squatter problem on the controversial Waitiki land. And Pope Francis arrives in Central African Republic as he concludes his tour of Africa.
Thank you for joining us on our bulletin tonight. Our sign language interpreter is Meresha Owiti. We want to begin tonight's bulletin on a sad note. 10 people have lost their lives in Gatundu, Kiambu County, after a vehicle they were traveling in lost control and plunged into a river.
The driver of the 14-seat Matatu lost control when negotiating a sharp corner, resulting into the deaths. 7
people were also injured in the accident and were rushed to Thika Level 5 Hospital.
The occupants of the vehicle were from a dowry payment ceremony. Shamumanyi reports.
Into this river, River Nyakibai near Matara Shopping Center, is where the 2NK Matatu plunged into after the driver lost control at 1 a.m. Sunday. Hours after the rescue operations, and an 8-month-old baby was still missing. It is after an intense search by police that the child's body was found, having drowned 100 meters from the scene of accident. The body was taken to General Cargo Funeral Home at the Thika Level 5 Hospital, where 9 other bodies, including 3 other children, 4 women and 2 men, were being preserved.
Tulikuja tukapanda mlima, hali palikuwa na a sharp corner. Na ndio gari letu ilibirigirika mara kadhaa tukajikuta kwa mto.
This is what has remained of the matatu that was transporting its 14 passengers from a jubilant dowry ceremony in Nyahururu back to Gadogo village in Murang'a, where most of them were from, only to be cast into this disaster.
Tulijisikia tu tuko kwa mto, tukajaribu vile tutaweza kujisaidia, tukashindwa. Ndio gari kwa bahati ya Mungu, gari ikapinduka mara ingine, ikaangaliza miguu juu. Wakati huo ndio tulipata mahali mtu akajisikilia viti, akainua shingo hivi. Ndio wakati huo ni kuitana na kuita Mungu na kuita wale wengine tulikuwa na wao waje watusaidie.
A woman and her 3 grandchildren, as well as the matatu driver, were among those that died. 4 of the passengers survived and were treated and discharged from the Thika Level 5 hospital.
Kwa bahati, watu wawili walikuwa wameinua vichwa vyao hivi, kwa sababu gari ilipoanguka ililala kidogo. Sasa wakaweza kuinua macho vichwa yao.
Murang'a Governor Mwangi wa Iria visited the survivors in the hospital and condoled with those that lost their loved ones. He appealed to drivers to observe traffic regulations and be extra cautious during the ongoing heavy rains.
Vile tutafanya ni kwamba katika kila familia tutawapatia jumla ya usaidizi wa shilingi 1,100 ili waweze kufanya mipango ya kununua jeneza na pia kufanya mambo ya usafiri wa mwili.
In Migori County, there is more tragedy as the bodies of 14 victims that were swept away by floods in Sori Saturday are yet to be found. Search teams who have been trying to locate the bodies have not been successful, leading to a state of desperation in the town. Migori County Deputy Commissioner James Mabea says the search operation has been suspended for 3 days to allow the bodies to come afloat.
The dam actually burst its banks, which brought a lot of water. And when the vehicle was passing around this area, actually it caught them unaware.
Sharon Momanyi, KTN News.
The 14th session of the Assembly of State Parties to the Rome Statute ended last week, and since then there has been intense and very confusing debate on whether Kenya won or lost on the issue of Rule 68. Speaking in Meru County this afternoon after attending a church service, Deputy President William Ruto says he is happy with the concluded deliberations at the ASP and lauded the efforts of the church in his case with former journalist Joshua Sang. The politicians who were with him also said that they were happy with the progress of the case, saying it's only a matter of time before the Kenya cases at the ICC are concluded.
Ile mpango na njama iliyokuwa imepangwa pale mbeleni, tumeona dalili sasa imeanza kusambaratika, na tunaamini ya kwamba in a very short time, in a very short while, we will be beyond here and we will be building our country together.
Not because the president and the deputy president are men of God, and because they believe in God, God gave us the way. Na ile maneno tulikuwa tumeenda kuomba tukapata.
ASP imekubali hiyo sheria haiwezi tumika, na sasa kile sisi tunaomba na kuendelea kuomba ni kwamba ile mahakama iweze kujua ya kwamba huo ndio ulikuwa msimamo wa ASP.
A reminder that that is the subject of our discussion on Checkpoint a little later on in this bulletin, so keep your comments coming in. The hashtag on Twitter is Checkpoint. SMS number is 22155. The Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta nominated 3 politicians into his cabinet in a move that also saw reshuffle and sacking of some cabinet members. Should the 3 politicians be approved by the National Assembly, 1/3 of President Kenyatta's cabinet will be composed of politicians. Political analysts say recruitment of politicians into the cabinet is a strategy by the president to win support from the opposition strongholds ahead of the 2017 polls. Patrick Amimo has more.
I'd like to begin the exercise now, and When President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy named the first cabinet under the Jubilee administration, they promised it will be a cabinet of technocrats and not politicians.
In the cabinet, there will be only 2 politicians, the president and myself.
But when the cabinet of 18 was fully constituted, 3 politicians had been included: Najib Balala, Charity Ngilu and Kazungu Kambi.
Watawacha jukumu zao zote za kisiasa, vio vyote ambao wameshikilia za kisiasa, na wakati wanatumikia serikali yetu hawatajihusisha na siasa kamwe.
In Tuesday's cabinet shuffle, President Uhuru Kenyatta retained into cabinet politicians Najib Balala, Joseph Nkaiseri and Eugene Wamalwa. He nominated 3 other politicians to the cabinet: Mwangi Kiunjuri, Malindi lawmaker Dan Kazungu and Kericho Senator Charles Keter.
Cabinet is political. Public service is technical. President Uhuru and Ruto should have known that, and at least I'm happy now they have passed political science class 101.
In April this year, President Kenyatta rewarded several former cabinet ministers allied to the Party of National Unity in the Grand Coalition government with parastatal jobs. Mwangi Kiunjuri, who is the Grand National Union Party leader, was then appointed chairperson of the Earthy Water Services Board. He has now been nominated to the Plum Docket of Devolution to replace Anne Waiguru, who resigned on Saturday. Kiunjuri's party is among affiliates of the Jubilee Alliance that must fold before January to allow formation of an umbrella party for President Kenyatta's re-election bid.
Kiunjuri is Kibaki's foster child. So the easiest way of getting this aloof man to get involved in something or to appeal to the Kibaki old guard, I think Mwangi Kiunjuri is a guy to go to. He is the Mr. Fix-It when you want to get Kibaki.
The president has raided the opposition again and nominated Malindi ODM lawmaker Dan Kazungu to the cabinet, maybe to fill the gap after sacking suspended Labour Cabinet Secretary Kazungu Kambi. Late last year, Kenyatta poached Interior Cabinet Secretary Joseph Nkaiseri from ODM.
The best general will tell you that rather than killing your opponent, if you can raid them and bring them to your camp, you have achieved much more, because you stand being told even the secrets, the strategies of your opponents. So for Uhuru to raid the ODM, I think it was a very nice political move. It also is something that is a pointer to the kind of regions that you'll be looking for support in 2017.
Kericho Senator Charles Keter, a close ally of Deputy President William Ruto, has been nominated to replace Sack Davis Chirchir, who was on suspension.
I think giving him this docket, and especially in energy at this time, is an attempt to ensure that those even as far away as Turkana can start having confidence that our resources will not just be stolen. No.
Charity Ngilu is now out of cabinet after the shuffle. Dr. Cleopa Mailu, the Chief Executive Officer of Nairobi Hospital, has been nominated to the health docket. Mailu hails from Lower Eastern, a stronghold of Code Corps Principal Kalonzo Musyoka. Patrick Amimo, KTN News.
Now, even before the ink dries on the Kenyan government's announced truce on the protracted 930-acre Waitiki land saga, it's now emerging that the deal might be cast into even more doubt, with questions being raised on whether indeed the two parties exhaustively agree.
Now, with no one revealing the finer details on pricing, precisely what has been playing wedge between the landowner and the state, a meeting in Likoni has kicked off the storm, posing the question, how binding was this agreement? KTN's Coast reporter Francis Ontomwa with the details.
Na rais wa jamhuri yetu tukufu ya Kenya, Mheshimiwa Uhuru Kenyatta, na amenituma hapa kirasmi kuleta ujumbe wake kuanzisha mpango wa kumaliza mambo ya Waitiki.
Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i was on this occasion playing the messenger, conveying correspondence from State House to Likoni. And what will make the occasion become one of the rarest, the man at the center of focus, Yvone Waitiki, will be paraded publicly with his spouse just for the endorsement.
Tumekubaliana kwamba ahadi yangu itakuwa inagaywa vile mulisikia, na kwa hivyo sasa siwezi kesho niseme sikusema hiyo maneno au nini.
Na kwa sasa hakuna tatizo lolote, mambo yote yatasonga mbele.
But even as confessions were made, it was apparent that no one had courageously confronted the elephant in the room. How much did Waitiki agree to receive from government? In the past, Waitiki has demanded 9.3 billion shillings in compensation for his vast property, exactly the reason why the stalemate has never ended. And even with this time around, Waitiki appeared to be nodding to a deal laden with apprehensions.
Sasa sitaki kudwelo sana na hiyo mambo kwa sababu tuendelea kuzungumza zaidi.
The astute businessman and farmer in September this year accused the national government of plotting to seize his land when a controversial survey was launched by the Lands Ministry without his consent. This even as Matiang'i delivered President Uhuru Kenyatta's message that the survey process needed to be subjected to a crash program to be completed by December 21st ahead of issuance of title deeds backed up by the National Land Commission.
Tumechezwa cheri sana. Tulikuwa tukiimbishwa nyimbo za kutafuta hizi ardhi za mapambano mpaka kuchi hatukupata.
Alafu sasa tuende phase 2 ya kutoa title deeds na deadline tumepewa na Mheshimiwa Rais ni tarehe 5 January.
The perceived feat has ignited many other voices of squatters at controversial settlements at Barawa and Kisauni. Upon the Waitiki announcement, these people, mainly from the Mijikenda community, came out boldly to petition for their case as well.
Mheshimiwa Rais, tafadhali kilio chetu kipokee na ukaweza kufanya hivyo, maana wewe unaweza.
Tumebomolewa, tumechomewa vyombo, tukiwa katika familia 470.
And with more and more people from the coast coming forth to air their concerns, I meet Dorothy Modhoni, one of those settled in the controversial Waitiki land. She takes me through the hurdles that have come on her way. However, she now sees salvation.
This is the best day so far because what has happened will give us peace of mind.
Over the years, the Waitiki land saga has proved a hot potato that has seen deals brokered and deals broken in the same measure. For thousands of squatters who've lived in this land, their belief this time around is that the deal will be real. Francis Ontomwa, KTN News, Mombasa.
What's at stake at the climate change conference that starts tomorrow? Can world leaders manage to reach a deal? Now, and what happens if they don't? Here's a look at some of the challenges and expectations facing the climate talks in Paris, with global warming set to dominate the agenda.
World leaders are trying to show off their green credentials, from the US president's trip to Alaska to Francois Hollande's visit to Iceland. Glaciers are melting at an alarming rate, this one reducing by 50 metres a year.
All of these people have come to see the effects of global warming, but we're not trying to promote a kind of global warming tourism. We cannot become willing spectators of our own demise.
Climate change is affecting us all. Sea levels have risen by 20 centimetres since 1900, and there's an increase in droughts, heat waves and cyclones. The average global temperature has risen by 1 degree since the pre-industrial era, and this is mainly down to humans. Limiting warming to 2 degrees or even less is the #1 priority of the Paris COP21 conference. That needs a reduction of 40 to 70% of greenhouse gases by 2050, and a major change of habits. Fossil fuels, the main emitters, still account for 80% of world energy production.
There is a good news part of this story, because even as the pollution has continued to mount up, the technologists and business leaders have brought down the cost of electricity from renewable sources to the point where now it's cheaper than electricity from burning fossil fuels in the majority of countries now.
China and the United States are the top 2 polluters on the planet. They say they're determined to succeed in Paris, where they failed in Copenhagen in 2009. Nearly 150 heads of state and government are at the conference, so reaching a deal won't be easy. But ensuring concrete action afterwards promises to be harder still.
World leaders are gathered in Paris, France to find ways of reversing the impact of global warming, with Kenya being one of the most affected countries, given that its economy depends on climate-sensitive areas like agriculture, livestock and tourism. The Kenyan delegation is led by President Uhuru Kenyatta, who will join other leaders, including US President Barack Obama, for a leaders' meeting tomorrow. Our special correspondent Alex Chamwada, who is in Paris, reports on why Kenya's stakes are high.
Leading to this 2015 United Nations Climate Change Conference, countries had been asked by March 2015 to publicly declare what actions they intended to take under a new global agreement. Those national statements will be presented at the conference. There will be a high-level meeting of heads of state and government, among them President Barack Obama of the US. Kenya will be represented by President Uhuru Kenyatta. Participants will be discussing mitigation and adaptation to climate change, with climate-sensitive areas like forestry, agriculture, wildlife and transport high on the agenda.
50 years ago, so many of us thought that climate change is a myth, thought that it was something that is happening in other parts of the world and does not affect us. But there is now convergence, and there is total agreement globally that the world has warmed in the last 10 decades than ever before. And we are therefore seeing the vagaries of climate change affecting particularly the developing countries and Africa.
Kenya is located in the Greater Horn of Africa region, which is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. More than 80% of the country's landmass is arid and semi-arid land, with poor infrastructure and other developmental challenges. Secondly, Kenya's economy is highly dependent on climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture that is mainly rain-fed. The consequences of global warming in this sector are worrying.
We used to have rains during the long rains, and also we used to have the short rains. They were predictable. We could even tell the exact date that they're going to start. Today, we're experiencing erratic rainfalls, and therefore our food security is actually seriously threatened.
For example, in tea, there's a lot of effect of hailstones destroying the tea. There's effects of frost. There are effects of new pests and diseases. There's a lot of erosion because the land is open where the tea is grown.
We think that pastoralism as an industry, as an economy, probably will, if there will be no interventions, will become extinct. We're also affected by climate change on our wildlife. Tourism is the backbone of this country's economy, and wildlife is also affected by this. Because of continuous drought, they don't get enough forage, they don't get enough space.
Resources that are geared towards development, are now into emergency, are routed to emergency. So, meaning that, the development processes are slowed down, but also in terms of the damage that it has on the economic growth. It's estimated that, if nothing is done, Kenya, for example, would be losing 1.2 billion Kenyan shillings every year to flooding. So this is a tremendous drawback for the country.
One area that we are also partnering in through our work with the government is to help create innovations in green energy and green technologies. So Net Fund, which is a parastatal under the Ministry of Environment, is doing all kinds of great work to help foster innovative ideas in the private sector to develop new energy technologies that are based on renewable systems.
Kenya has been a leader in Africa on this issue. Kenya was among the very first countries in the world to submit its post-2020 goals on climate change. In Kenya, the government, the people of Kenya deserve commendation, deserve to be commended for having done this. And I look forward to the United States and Kenya working together in Paris to help achieve this agreement.
At the end of this meeting, leaders hope to overcome past differences and sign a legally binding pact on how to reduce emission of greenhouse gases that cause global warming. For KTN News, I'm Alex Chamwada in Paris.
To Checkpoint tonight, we are discussing the outcome of the Assembly of State Parties meeting that has just concluded. Please send in your feedback on our discussion. The hashtag is Checkpoint. You can also SMS us. The number is 22155. My panelists tonight, we have Senator Kipchumba Murkomen. We also have Esther Waweru, who's from the Kenya Human Rights Commission. And joining us from our Kakamega office right here in Kenya is Elisha Ongoya. He will also be contributing to our discussion tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start with you, Senator. It was a victory. Why?
Well, first of all, it's because we achieved what we went to negotiate. For us, it was a very difficult negotiation. Took about 10 days. 5 days were very intensive, but eventually the countries agreed. It wasn't easy. At least our position was an African position, so that assisted the fact that 34 countries were negotiating as a bloc. There were two agendas, the Kenyan agenda and the South African agenda, and they were carried together as an omnibus of some sort in terms of the negotiation itself. We had also problems in other countries all over the world, but after explanation, using side meetings and the debates we had, we easily won the Latin America countries, Eastern Europe countries, fairly convinced almost half of Western Europe, but the biggest challenge we had was the British, who actually were the originators of Rule 68 in the past ASP meeting, and who at that point in time undertook to Kenya that it was not going to apply retrospectively. One of the other misgivings that people have in public is that we were going there to amend Rule 68. We were not amending Rule 68. We wanted reaffirmation of the fact that it will not apply retroactively. Amending Rule 68 would be to produce a different, rule. We were not interested in that. Our interest was retroactive application. And for Kenyans to appreciate this, the history is like this. When the rule was put in place last time, there was an undertaking that it would not apply retroactively, according to the text itself, which is Article 51(4) of the Rome Statute. That position was supposed to be applied by the court. When it reached the court in 2 out of the 3 said that it was not very clear from the ASP that was not to apply retroactively. Okay. So what we did was to say, therefore, to fill the gap that the court said, and the court said very clearly that as long as ASP clarifies to us that position, then we are going to be willing to apply. So we went there to make that clarification, and I'm sure you have the text here, I have it here. It makes that clarification. 2 is that there are people who have said, Kenya lost because it will still up to the court. I think people need to appreciate how courts and work everywhere in the world. Once you have a case in court, there is no other way to remove it. It's up to the judges. The role of the legislator, whether in Kenya, even in the most failed countries like Somalia, you do the law, then the person who will apply now that law is the court. And the court already gave that permissive will by saying, as long as the ASP makes a particular deliberation and makes this clarification, we'll be willing to apply. So for us, we had done our part because ASP is like parliament in the local
so it's the legislative body of the ICC.
Now that is done. Okay. It is up to the court now to go and apply. And we have made it very...
And you're confident that the court will
apply?
I
am more than confident because for 2 things. 1, the court has said they're willing to receive clarification. 2, is because if it's a court of law that's going to apply, one of the accusations of ICC was that they are working in collusion with external forces outside the court to have a predetermined outcome of the case. We are all watching to see how that will apply, and it may be a week or 2. We believe that the court has to apply, and if they don't, it means that they are not standing by the rule of law.
Okay. Esther, civil society was also present there. Do you believe this is a victory? What's your take on Murkomen's explanation?
Thanks, Yvonne. I think the victory that Senator Murkomen portrays, for me, I wouldn't term it as a victory. If you look at the debate just before the ASP, Kenya was actually talking of suspending the application of Rule 68 in the Ruto and Sang case. What has happened at the end of the ASP is that actually there isn't a resolution that says do not apply Rule 68. What I think is important to also clarify is the origin of Rule 68. Rule 68 is primarily meant to allow the prosecutor use evidence that are been previously recorded, and which, in the case of Ruto and Sang, has actually been put to cross-examination by the defense and by the victim's lawyer. So therefore, it is evidence that has been tested, but upon presentation of the same by the witnesses, they have either not appeared in court subsequently, or they have recanted on account of witness intimidation and massive interference, which is something that the prosecutor has actually said over and over again. So I do not see it as a victory in that respect, because, you know, as I started by saying, from the beginning, the government's position was that the Rule 68 should be suspended.
They wanted it suspended and
Can
not
I,
reaffirmed?
can I respond to that? I
let
think
me
it will
just
be
finish.
unfair for Esther to continue even in the first place. First of all, she was not there. And her boss, George Kegoro, came the first day. When he arrived, he saw we were there, he ran away, together with somebody called Njonjo Muye. The only person who sat there through was Gladwell Otieno, Kwamchetsi Makoa, and Aaron Duby, who didn't even reach the last day also. I mean, the only person who stayed until we closed the conference, there was no CSO who stayed until we closed the conference, but Kwamchetsi stayed to the second last day. And let me say this.
Okay.
We have our negotiating text from the first draft to the last. Excuse me. At no point did we say that we suspend.
Okay.
Because how did we say you suspend? The only argument we made was that it should not apply retroactively as per the statute itself, and also as per clarification of the past ASP.
Okay.
Two, and
I'd like it to finish your point.
And it's good for Esther to appreciate that, is that the reason why they want to force this evidence to the court is to the case is because, first of all, they have failed. Two, the people, the witnesses that are actually refused to come and testify in court are within the jurisdiction of the court, hidden somewhere in a country we don't know because of witness program. Those people have said, we do not believe that the statement we gave can be tested in court because it's lies. So for her to say that is not the only way, and Esther, appreciatively being a lawyer like myself, should appreciate that the only way you test a testimony in court is through what we call cross-examination.
Okay, all right. We do have another guest with us, Elisha Ongoya, who joins us from our Kakamega office, and from whom we have gotten much, much interpretation of matters happening at the ICC. Elisha, thanks for joining us. What do you make of the discussion so far and the interpretation as well as the outcome of the ASP?
Thank you so much, Yvonne. I have listened to the discussions in the studio, but let me make some side comment first. It is not accurate that if our colleague was not at the Assembly of State Parties, just as my friend Kipchumba Murkomen was, then she has no legitimate right to make a comment one or the other on the implications of the proceedings and the resolutions that came from that meeting. But having said that, your primary question is whether or not Kenya scored victory at that event. The interpretation of whether or not a party has won anything must be looked at in the context of what the party sought to achieve. If I understand the position that made Kenya take what it took to the Assembly of State Parties, it is that Kenya has not been happy with the decision of the trial chamber to use recanted statements of witnesses as part of the prosecution's evidence for the record as an integral part of the material that the judge will rely on to determine one way or the other whether or not the two accused persons are culpable. Now, there are two issues that emerge out of Kenya's position at the ICC. First, diplomatically speaking, I think Kenya scored something. Kenya managed to push an agenda item to the agenda for discussion. Whether or not it was successful in getting the eventual resolution determined the way Kenya wanted is a different issue, but at least in international relations, the fact that the country managed to push its agenda onto, so to speak, the agenda items for discussion is a particular victory that we must give it to the Kenyan delegation. But having said that, whether Kenya only wanted to show diplomatic might is a debatable question. The question whether or not eventually the court will follow the minuting of the item that Kenya finally got minuted as an integral part of the proceedings is still a question at large. Let's remember that there is already a judicial determination that these recanted testimonies are admissible in evidence. That is already a determination. If nothing else were to happen up to and including this minute, then the existing determination of the court is that those statements are admissible. The question whether or not eventually they will be used is a question that is pending before the appellate chamber of the court. And the manner in which the court would go about determining that question is by use of rules set out in the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties on how we interpret agreements reached between states and other international legal entities. I personally think that it's too early in the day to conclude, as the Kenyan delegation has concluded, and as I've had my colleague and very good friend Kipchumba Murkomen suggest this evening, that they are now sure they are going to have it their way in the courts. I think that is, to a very large extent, from a litigation lawyer like myself, a bit naive.
Okay, all right. I'd like you to hold that thought for just a moment, and thanks for that perspective, giving praise and in equal measure. But I'd like to hear from Esther for just a moment, because you were making a point as to why you don't share the senator's enthusiasm.
Yes, and let me just at this very early opportunity correct what the senator has said. The trial chamber did not ask the parties to go to the ASP to seek a clarification. If they did that, if they even attempted to do that, that would be an abdication of their role. It's very clear that the assembly cannot dictate upon the court what and how to apply the rules that have been made. So my point is that the decision on whether to allow the evidence under Rule 68 still remains that of the trial appeals chamber to make.
It was also your contention that this is not a matter that should have been discussed by the ASP.
It shouldn't have been, because our argument then and now is that it was sub judice. It actually amounted to interference of the judicial independence of the court, because we were what the government was seeking to have was a discussion on matters that are live before the court and which are currently being decided upon by the appeals chamber. So what the government of Kenya should have done is to wait for the appeals chamber to deliver its decision. And there is absolutely no way, as I said earlier, that the appeals chamber would have said, we're not able to make this decision unless you go back to the Assembly of State Parties and come back with a clarification. Having said that, and just to add on to the point that I was making, Kenya did not, in my opinion, score any victory. The only victory that they got was to get the matters, the two items, in the agenda of the day. And it was very clear from the plenary discussions, which I attended physically, that actually states were not enthusiastic about having those discussions. There were strong statements made by different countries, including the largest by the EU states, a group of 27 countries actually saying this is tantamount to interfering with judicial independence and integrity, and they outrightly said, we do not accept the proposals by Kenya.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think, first of all, my friend Ongoya has actually, spoken exactly what I was going to say. That in terms of the document itself, in terms of what we wanted, we got it. That's why, if you see in most of my comments, I've said that we won the battle, but the war is on. Because the most important thing here is to say that we got what we wanted. How the court is going to apply, it's up to the court. And for us, for me now, speaking from my position as a lawyer, there's no reason why, after the court had said in its ruling that if ASP wanted this rule not to apply retroactively, it should have made it very clear. What we did was to make that easy for ASP itself by going back to the same place where the rule was applied to make clarification. And we need to make this correction, Yvonne.
Yes.
NGOs came with the, and truly Amnesty International, speaking on behalf of them, say that this rule is, we should not discuss this subject because sub judice. Kenya managed to get that subject being discussed. And the reason is this. When the president was talking about excusal of the president using a video link, the case was in court as well as in ASP. And ASP managed to discuss the two without the argument of sub judice.
Right.
And finally, ASP made a decision that video link would be used. The court also applied the same rule. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's nothing different. It has been done before.
Okay.
There was precedent. It can be done today.
All right.
Yeah.
I'd like us to, Esther,
Let me
and
just
then move
correct
away
that.
from,
In 2013, there was no question before the courts as to the use of prior recorded evidence or the presence of an accused person.
Okay.
Those were matters that were discussed at the ASP, but were not matters that were currently under consideration then by the chamber.
Okay,
I'm
I'd like
talking
us
about
to
another decision. I hope she had me. Yeah.
Yes, I would like us to move
Yeah.
this discussion forward just a little bit, because I think the points, your points on that particular aspect are clear. What about the victims? Because that's something we get to hear quite a bit. Esther, are we talking enough about the victims? Are we applying the same fervor, in terms of getting justice eventually for the victims?
Yvonne, victims have been totally lost in this whole debate. What we keep hearing is just about the accused persons, sometimes only one accused person, and we often forget Joshua Sang. But the victims have totally been blacked out of this debate. Even with regards to the prayer rallies that we had, no one held any prayer rallies for the victims. No one has sought to see how victims would actually get justice locally. We keep hearing the politicians say that the ICC is a failed court, it's a kangaroo court, but we haven't seen any positive and concrete measures nationally to actually address the plight of victims. As we speak, and even as Senator Murkomen terms this as a victory, I would actually want to hear from him how that translates
to
victory
Absolutely.
for that woman in Kibera who was gang raped and infected with HIV/AIDS, for that person, that household, which is still in camps. We have over 17 camps currently in the country. We haven't closed them down. We haven't relocated them. And how that victory of getting Kenya's agenda item discussed at the ASP actually translates to justice for the over 89,000 integrated IDPs.
Senator?
I think that is the best question you've asked tonight, because there have been lies being peddled out there that we have not cared about the victims. First of all, let's agree on one thing, that over 1,000 people were killed. It is fact. Many people were displaced, over 600,000. It's also a fact that the government of Kenya has used to offer 15 billion Kenya shillings to resettle victims. The coalition government used slightly less than 6 billion. The current government, less than 2 years, are used to about 9 billion in terms of IDP as resettlement and all this program. The question of seeking for justice, why we are saying that Ruto and Sang, first of all, we need to focus on this thing. Every time we say that Ruto and Sang are becoming victims of a flawed process in ICC, people say, what about the other victims who died? Because, and I, with all due respect, I saw your tweet and your sister newspaper putting an editorial accusing the deputy president and saying, insinuating that the deputy president and Sang might have been the ones who killed people. I mean, we must separate issues. First of all, creating a victims through a court process in Joshua Sang and William Ruto does not help the victims who died. Okay. The argument I'm trying to make here is that Martin Luther King Jr. said that injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Trying to sacrifice William Ruto and Sang on sins that they never committed in the false hope that we are going to give the victims justice is unfair to those victims.
Senator,
let me just come to
allow
this.
me to interject. With all due respect, shouldn't it be the court to decide?
Let me just come to that.
Innocent until proven guilty, but isn't it the court's work to decide whether they're guilty or not?
It's for the court to apply.
Okay.
But we say in law that the process of justice is as good as the product of justice. And the point we are making here is that, and you saw us, we were not very enthusiastic in saying anything about ICC when the process was going on. But when ICC realized that the case was collapsing, what did they do? They tried to patch up the case by creating roadblocks on the side of the defense so that doesn't succeed. In any case, that kind of attempt by the court is not actually intended in getting the results. It's actually intended in what they call making Kenya an example. And Kenya is not supposed to be an example of violence as a result of just justifying an ICC court. Okay. So let me come to this very clear. Yeah. I know victims that suffered. I know friends that lost their loved ones. They are not going to be served justice by creating other victims of a judicial process that is flawed. And I think this message needs to be made. Right. And also the message needs to be made that this this young government, in less than 3 years, has used over 9 billion trying to resettle.
All right, Senator, your point on that is made. I'd like you to just pause a little bit. So let's bring in Elisha Ongoya on this matter. What are your thoughts so far in terms of finding justice for the victims? You know, is there another way, and are we not discussing that? Because there's also the issue of cases being pursued locally, and to date we know that hasn't been very successful.
There are 2 or 3 ways to look at this, Yvonne. Number one, it is true that this government has episodically dealt with aspects of victims through resettlement of IDPs. Some IDPs, I must emphasize, as Honorable Kipchumba Murkomen has alluded to. But again, it is also significant to point out that this government has never demonstrated the kind of passion that we saw at the Assembly of State Parties in terms of official representation, in terms of dealing with victims' matters. That's also a historically correct fact. So that it's critical for the Honorable Kipchumba Murkomen to appreciate that the people of Kenya, at least those who are watching, those who are just officious by standards, who want to see the notion of justice in terms of the symbolisms that the government is setting across, to see the same valor, the same enthusiasm, the same zest that we have seen at the Assembly of State Parties, that we sometimes see displayed at the ICC trial chamber itself by official representation of government, also playing out when we are discussing matters of the victims. And that is not coming out. There's another issue that we need to look at. In terms of the question of victims, they do not just want to see one aspect of justice in terms of being compensated. Someone wronged them. The question these victims are asking, the few I interact with, is they want to know who did it and why. That can only take the form of that person at one point or the other being brought to book. So that even if we were to agree with Honorable Kipchumba Murkomen that this process at The Hague is flawed, and it's neither his duty nor my duty, it is not his right nor my right to reach that conclusion. That process ought to be allowed to run its full course, and therefore it can be interrogated in retrospect. One may then pose a question to him. What, now that he is a close ally of the powers that be, has happened locally so that we can reach the conclusion that yes, that process at The Hague is flawed? We, the government of the day, are doing the following to ensure that we bring to book those who wronged the victims, so that the victims can also be satisfied that yes, so and so did this for us or to us, and for the following reasons. That is totally absent. There has been no meaningful progress towards putting in place measures to ensure that there is a local mechanism that then can bring to trial, that can bring to book those who perpetrated the atrocities that are in the public domain to have happened to the victims, so that the victims can also be satisfied that yes, we had had somebody being called upon to answer. So we know why this happened to us and who did it to us.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, please.
I think many Kenyans, including my friend Ongoya, have read the Constitution, but they never appreciate it. The responsibility of charging those who have committed offenses is an independent office that cannot be directed by the president, the director of public prosecution. And the last time I saw him publish his report in public was that he listed the number of prosecutions that took place, people who were convicted. I remember there was someone convicted in Nakuru, there was someone in Kericho. It may not have reached the scale that we wanted. And you know, Ongoya knows one thing. A justice process, a judicial process, like he was trying to insinuate to me earlier, does not promise a result. It's a process. Sometimes you take through, and that is why the process is as good as the product. And when you see any possibility of injustice in a process, then that's why we are saying that the ICC process
allow me to make a parallel, Senator.
So second, people have said we've never gone around to pray for the victims, to rallies. Those victims do not need any more rallies. They don't need prayers. We are in government. They could need prayers, but not from the context of their situations in an unhelpful hand. Their situation is in the hand of this government. instead of us calling for rallies for victims, we are supposed to assist those victims. We are supposed to use money to compensate them. We are supposed to restore them. We cannot actually, the only gift we have given as politicians to those who are facing court process is prayers. But the actual gift we've given to those who have suffered is to be able to try to restore their lives.
Senator, before Esther comes in, you did mention the fact that, you know, the DPP's office is independent. The judiciary is independent of the president. However, just to draw some parallels with what we've seen with the president just before the Pope came, the president, you know, announced the results of that task force in which he said, working very closely together with the judiciary, we saw the Chief Justice there. We saw, you know, a number of efforts made. In that case, he didn't per se direct the judiciary how to do its work, but there was a lot of talk about, you know, collaboration and cooperation and working hard together. And some would say he could use the same effort to do the same thing now when it comes to finding justice and
I want to say that the president
is that something he can do as well?
The president has said that before. When he came to do the address, what do you call, State of the Nation address to Parliament this year, he enumerated the things they have done, the number of people who are prosecuted, what we've done to DPP to be able to have the capacity to do the prosecution. Remember that DPP now has a better budget. You know, the office of the DPP has a better budget. There are many other prosecutors who have now been hired. They have the capacity to do their work. So that in terms of support financially, giving technical support to the DPP will be done. But you cannot, you see as now outsiders, not forget about the president, even you as Yvone, you cannot walk to DPP now, dictate to him that prosecute so and so, do this and so. But in terms of collaborative assistance that can be given by executive in terms of finances.
So you say that's been done. Okay, let's bring in another aspect, because the civil society organizations that were present at the ASP were also accused of having their own agenda, and were accused of, you know, he who pays the piper calls the tune, and that was what was being said. And this is a criticism to you. I don't know if you can respond to this, that there have been real questions that have been raised about how the investigations have been done by the ICC. Bensouda herself, the ICC chief prosecutor, has admitted as much when they were launching their strategic plan for the next 2 years. And some say, well, we don't see the civil society organizations addressing those issues as to how the investigations were conducted, into saying, well, let's take an audit of the process, into even, for example, lobbying and picketing as much on the international stage as is being done locally. What's your response?
My quick response to that is the ICC is still a very young institution. It is learning on the way. With regards to investigation, civil society organizations were not involved in the investigations process, but we were useful in the identification of victims. Civil society organizations were actually who are mostly monitoring the elections of 2007-2008, were very critical in identifying those victims that they met who had suffered from the violations that occurred. The second thing that I want to say is that with regards to the question of whether or not to audit the Office of the Prosecutor with regards to investigations, I think the point that we have driven across is that once investigations have commenced, it is very critical to ensure that the key witnesses are actually put under protection. What we've seen, particularly with the Kenyatta case, is that most witnesses had actually been reached to and interfered with through bribery, intimidation, and some have actually disappeared. A matter that actually led to the withdrawal of the charges against Francis Muthaura and later against Uhuru Kenyatta. So the question of ensuring that you protect your evidence and you secure your witnesses is something that I believe the Office of the Prosecutor has learned as we go forward. And that brings me to the issue of the second request that Kenya actually had at the ASP, calling for an audit or a panel of 5 jurists to audit the process of identification of witnesses. We spoke to a couple of people, and our own belief is that actually that process would actually lead to further disintegration of the cases, because what you're actually going to get is information that would enable one to triangulate that information and reach out to those witnesses that haven't been reached out to as yet.
So can I say something about that?
Yes, please.
The reason why the civil society organizations are actually not speaking the truth is because they are of conflict of interest. And we must call it as it is, Yvonne, and I want to say it as it is. The civil society organization, including her boss, Mr. Kegoro, Gladwell Otieno, they are not civil society. Those are political players on the other side opposing Jubilee. And that is known. Before this, when this case was being investigated, the key players were people like Kegoro. Kegoro was the secretary of the Waki Commission. You know, I'm talking about facts. Let me just conclude.
That's all right.
Two is that as soon as the case started in The Hague, it was the same civil society organization went to court to block the president and the deputy from standing. When they realized that they did not succeed there because the court said it's up to the people of Kenya, they joined the petition to oppose the president. When the petition ended, after this case, they went to support the Rule 68. Even in The Hague itself, they are called coalition. They are not even called, they are called ICC, coalition of ICC NGOs. So the point we are talking about here is that there is absolutely no pursuit of truth. And I want Kenyans to know that the Gladwell Otienos, the George Kegoros, the Aaron Dubis are not independent civil society players. They are political players with Makao Mutu and the like on the other side of the political divide. No, you don't cut me short on that. But that's a very important point. That is why when we petitioned the ISP that we must put in place the statutory requirement of the independent oversight mechanism, they panicked. Why? Because when we go back to investigate how this case started, it is the same people who are going to be nailed.
All right, Senator,
and that is why we appreciate the Assembly of State Parties for agreeing the second petition of Parliament of Kenya, signed by both CORD and Jubilee.
Thank you, Senator.
For establishment of independent oversight
I really am running out of time, and I need to give everybody some time to conclude. So I'd like to start with Elisha Ongoya. If you can, please, in just under a minute, do you think the ICC still offers hope to provide justice to the victims? There's been a lot of discrediting of the process, a lot of political rhetoric surrounding it. Where do we go from here, Elisha? All right, I think we've lost that connection, or do we have it? Great. Elisha? Elisha, can you hear me? All right, we seem to have lost him there. Esther, just very quickly, if you can, in under 30 seconds, I'm told.
My concluding remark would be, no matter how much we restate or reaffirm certain rules of the court, no matter how much we malign civil society organizations and the Office of the Prosecutor, the fact remains that we have a past that has victims who have not been catered to in terms of their justice needs. The fact is that we have not addressed those specific needs. We have laws that need to be implemented, and we cannot restate our past. We need to address the past. We need to address the plight of victims.
All right, 30 seconds.
For me, I think we have an international criminal justice system that requires our role as a country. And that international justice system in the ICC must not be used to try to pursue regime change or to try to divide the country. What is very important is that the justice process must be allowed to run with the rules of justice without being interfered, without putting roadblocks on the way, without also forcing a case to ensure that you get certain people nailed for purpose of demonstrating that certain institutions or persons are powerful than ourselves.
All right, Senator, just a very quick one. What would happen if the court, the appeals chamber, decides to go ahead with Rule 68 being applied in the Ruto case?
Well, they will have violated the Vienna Convention, which is that negotiations are done in good faith.
Okay.
And therefore, like Ambassador Amina said, it will mean that we are too much a weight for the ICC membership to continue being part of that institution.
So we'll consider leaving the
Absolutely.
ICC? Okay, all right, thank you very much. Senator Kipchumba Murkomen.
Even if Kenya withdraws from the Rome Statute, the cases will continue until the final conclusion.
Okay.
So let's not be deluded to believe that walking out of the ICC will actually terminate the case.
We are aware of
all
that.
Right, okay. Esther Waweru, who's program manager at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. Senator Kipchumba Murkomen, as well as Elisha Ongoya, who joined us from our Kakamega Bureau office. We thank you all for your views on this matter. We wait to see what happens at the appeal chamber. We'll be getting into your feedback in just a moment. You're watching KTN Weekend Prime. This is Checkpoint. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to KTN Weekend Prime. Pope Francis today arrived in Bangui, the capital of the Central African Republic, on the final stop of his African visit. The trip came following security concerns as nearly 1 million people have been forced from their homes by fighting between Christian and Muslim militants since March 2013. The Pope has declared himself a pilgrim of peace and an apostle of hope and wouldn't be stopped from visiting the conflict-ravaged country.
Touchdown Al-Italia onto the Central African Republican soil, and Pope Francis would be received with song, dance and jubilations. Indeed, the much-needed symbol of hope and peace for the country that has been ravaged in war and conflicts. Large crowds lined the road from the airport to welcome him, and people cheered and sang when he arrived at the Saint Savo camp for displaced people in the capital. Residents sang and danced for the pontiff, expressing hopes that he would act as a mediator to quell the conflict that has been tearing the country apart since President Francois Bozize was ousted in a coup. The population of the camp was only about 75 people a few months ago, but since an outburst of violence at the end of September, it has risen to about 3,700. Pope Francis becomes the first pontiff in recent history to visit a war zone. Central African Republic has been embroiled in civil war between a Muslim minority and a Christian majority since March 2013. Thousands of people have been killed, about 1 million people displaced, and property looted and destroyed. Francis says he hopes next month's polls in the country will open a new chapter for the country. In an address at the presidential palace on Sunday, shortly after landing in Bangui, Francis asked for unity, pleading the citizens not to give in to the fear of ethnic, religious, and political differences. Acting President Catherine Samba Panza has asked him for forgiveness for the country's recent religious violence. The Pope's visit to Central African Republic includes the celebration of Mass in Bangui, a meeting with Muslim leaders, and a visit to a mosque in the city's Muslim enclave known as PK5. The Pope's visit to Bangui has been under constant review by the Vatican security officials amid concerns over the pontiff's security. He's spending only just over 24 hours in the country. Sharon Momanyi, KTN News.
Time now for the sports, and Kenya Pipeline's women's volleyball team successfully retained the Kenya national volleyball title after edging out rivals Prisons on the final day of the national playoffs in Makande Gymnasium in Mombasa. In the men's finals, GSU reclaimed the title they last won in 2013 after emerging overall winners on points.
Makande Gymnasium in Mombasa hosted the clash of the Titans as different teams battled out to win the title as the national volleyball playoffs came to a conclusion. 2013 champions GSU were out to reclaim the title they lost to Prisons last year as they took on Ulinzi. The servicemen were quick to make a statement as they took the first set 25-15 before stomping to victory in the second set with a 25-18 win. The soldiers, however, were not willing to be whipping boys as they grouped to win the third set to make matters 2-1. With the title within sight, GSU gave a show that saw them win the fourth set 25-19, reclaiming the title that eluded them last year and also bidding farewell to some of the squad members who were set to retire.
Nashukuru for the win, and I'm ready preparing for the club championship. I know next year maybe April, and I'm ready for that. All teams were a challenge for me. So I knew all teams from Prisons, KDF, to KPA were good teams.
Having won like 8 times, like 7 in a row, losing 3, it's okay. I feel so good. Sasa hii nikifikiria kuretire is okay.
In the ladies' tie, rivalry was renewed as 2013 champions Prisons took on the defending champions Pipeline in a heated final. Prisons were quick off the serves as they claimed the first set 25-19. Pipeline were however not deterred as they regrouped to win the second set 25-12 before shoving aside Prisons 25-19 in the third set. Despite Prison setting off on the right foot in the final set, Pipeline portrayed their resilience as they came from 16-11 down to successfully retain the title with a 27-25 win. Robinson Okenye, KTN Sports.
Ezekiel Oduor was the winner of the second edition of the Ace Africa 10-kilometer road race, which was held at Gormata and Bondo this weekend. The race that was held at Godmatar Primary School saw Oduor, who is a construction worker in Siaya town, cross the tape in a time of 30 minutes and 50.18 seconds, ahead of Muhoroni-based Benson Onyango Koitara, who a few weeks ago finished 10th at the Nairobi Stanchart Marathon. Amos Anayo came in third ahead of Vincent Ochieng, and Lilian Atieno Odira from Migori retained the women's title in a time of 40 minutes 44.42 seconds ahead of Evelyn Atieno and Marceline Ngesa. The annual Ace Africa road race attracted other categories.
I can go for, in fact, next year, I want to go to Olympic. I want to qualify for Olympic.
Tulianza si kwa mtu wa kwanza, nilikuwa wa mwisho huku. Ukienda ile line ya mbele wanakuangushanga, so nikaanza na line ya nyuma, nikaendelea nikafika kitu kama 1 kilometers, nikaanza kuvuka. Sasa ndio nikaanza kupita watu ndio nilikuwa nangangana nifikie hata wanaume wenyewe, lakini sikuafika.
Yes, sports and health go hand in hand in that if people do not live sedentary lifestyles, then they get so many diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and so we want to build a culture where people start using sports regularly.
Actually, the course was nice. What we have here, I think it is the best course. The one we had last year, I think, is not the best. We changed the course because of heavy rains. There's a portion that is flooded, so we had to go again the opposite direction, which turned out to be one of the best courses actually. I would recommend that we use the same next year.
Still on athletics, Winfrida Mosetti and Frederick Moranga today clinched the women's and men's titles during the Kisii 10-kilometer road race. Winfrida Mosetti, winner of the Madoka half marathon, crossed the finishing line in a time of 32 minutes and 26.19 seconds. Ruth Bosibori finished second as upstart Dolphine Omare finished third. Frederick Moranga upset the favorites to win the men's title in a time of 28 minutes, 38 seconds and 10 milliseconds. He was closely followed by Justine Mosetti, who, while Robert Sowayo took the third position and Benson Nakeri came. Anthony Gasharu shot an impressive 42 stable forward points to win the final leg of the Safaricom Business Golf Challenge 2014-2015 circuit held at the Karen Golf and Country Club. David Lowe is, however, the overall men's winner with 40 points, while Gedinji Mureithi was second with 39 points. Margaret Zande won the ladies category with 38 points, and the staff winner was George Makori with 33 points. The Telkom Giant is working with golfers across the country to develop the sport. The next golf challenge will kick off next year.
As John Allan Namu likes to say, kilicho na mwanzo hakina mwisho. So we'd like to confirm here today, in case you've been reading the blogs, that John Allan Namu is indeed leaving us. This was his last bulletin here with me.
Yes.
We'll tell them in a minute why and where you're going. But we prepared a little something to just show you.
Are you serious?
So this is what John Allan Namu's time has been like with us here at KTN. Take a look.
perspective. My name is John Allan Namu. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks once again for joining us this evening on KTN Weekend Prime.
Namu, kwanza kabisa niseme kwamba nitakukosa, yani nitakumiss, sisi sote tutakumiss. Nakumbuka wakati ambapo nilikuwa na mara ya kwanza hapa kwenye KTN, ulikuwa bado kijana mdogo.
Namu is an all-rounder. I knew him as a rugby player. I've known him as a person who likes what he does, very authoritative, and is always on point.
It was nice working with you for the last 3 years. We have worked with you on several, what we call projects, like Shopev and Perspective. I wish you all the best wherever you're going.
He's such a cool, calm and collected man, and so we'll miss that around the company.
You are our role model here, and under you, we've learned a lot.
As Namu lives, let me say that he's going to leave a big gap.
From the first time I saw your work as a student, I knew you're going to be a great journalist, and it's such an honor to have worked in the same company that you worked at.
I don't think if there is anybody who can really have any challenge to work with Namu.
I'm Yvone Okwara Matole. Our sign language interpreter is Meresha Owiti.
And I'm John Allan Namu.
It's been a while, so I don't even know how to get this started.
This is Hindi in 2014, and this is the inside story.
We do. We'll miss you. And we will miss you here at KTN Weekend Prime. So,
oh my gosh. Hey.
So everyone's here to say how much we miss you.
Hey. Hey, my gosh. What?
All right. So this here is for you. This is your work here. If you can take a shot of that.
Oh my
This is what Namu has represented here at KTN. Listen, wherever you're going, we know we will meet again, but you've touched everyone in this newsroom. I'll miss the chemistry. I don't know who I'm going to banter with, but...
wow. Hey, okay.
We wish you well, John. We wish you well.
My gosh, I'm so speechless. Guys, hey, gosh. Wow. Thank you guys so much. I did not... Hey, and for you guys to all come here at
they don't usually come here on Sundays.
Wow,
yeah,
my gosh, I'm so touched. I'm so humbled. Thank you. I mean, it's almost perfect symmetry. I joined on the 5th of December 2005.
Wow.
And yeah, just almost exactly 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
gosh,
something great happens in your life every 10 years.
Every 10 years,
yeah.
That is true.
Yeah, so you're going to start something and we wish you well.
Thank you. Asante sana bana. Thanks guys. Hey, guys, I wish I could hug all of you. My gosh. Thank you.
I love you, yeah.
I don't even know what to say, as in
I think you should be.
Wow.
This is what you do. You cut your cake.
My gosh.
That's how you wind this up.
Wow. Hey, okay, so
yeah. So cut through.
Are we doing this? Cut through.
For he's a jolly good fellow. For he's a jolly good fellow. For he's a jolly good fellow. And so say all of us.
Oh my gosh. Hey, okay.
Right, so let's wind this bulletin up because we didn't want any rumors. We didn't want anything. So wherever you've heard it from, this is the authoritative news channel.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for watching our bulletin tonight. Good night.
Good night.